here to welcome you to this evening's panel, Our History at Wayne, LGBTQ Life at Wayne State University, which is being presented by the Wayne State University Libraries as part of the university's sesquicentennial, which is a fancy tongue-twisting word for 150th anniversary. So we're really pleased to have this as part of that event, and also as part, certainly, of Pride Month, which we're celebrating this month of June. My name is Marquita Chambly. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and the Chief Diversity Officer here, so I'm really glad to be a part of this event. Really excited to hear what our panelists have to say. On behalf of Provost Keith Whitfield and President Imroy Wilson, I want to welcome members of the community who are here, members of the Wayne State, certainly Wayne State family, and members of the greater community. And I know there are a number of people who traveled to get here to be part of this event. So, and I also want to take a moment before I turn it over to acknowledge Allison Stancroft, who really was probably largely responsible for this along with Jill Warren. So I want to really give it up to her. My guess is that it's been a labor of love, but the labors of love are still labors nonetheless. So we appreciate the hard work that she and her team have done to make this evening possible. So in looking at the flyer, I really liked the questions that Allison put together at the very beginning to ask us to ponder them for a minute. What has changed? What hasn't changed? And what needs to change? So for, anybody who's paying attention knows that these are incredibly, I would call them extraordinary times that we're living in today across the country, in the state of Michigan, and certainly here on Wayne State's campus. And so when you look at Wayne State's history of engagement with the LGBT community, it has been relatively quietly humming along in the background for all these many years, and sometimes humming a little more loudly than others. And so what you'll hear, I think, from our panelists this evening has been a little bit of what I would call the good, the bad, and probably even some of the ugly in terms of how things were both in the country and probably here on campus. So I think it's going to be important for us to hear, what has changed as you all have observed, and then what still work do we have to do. And so it's interesting that in most of our communities that are marginalized, we've managed to persist over time. And so I think what we'll hear tonight is a testament to the persistence of our panelists and also the persistence of a vibrant LGBTQ community here at Wayne State. And so I want to first of all acknowledge too that the student body has really done a lot of hard work in helping to continue to keep LGBT issues in the fore, to the point where there's a group of faculty and staff who've been existing for a long time, but then there's been an advising group that recently has come about, in part because of the work of the faculty and staff group, but also, I think, in response to students' needs and understanding that we have students in our communities that need to be supported. So it's really been exciting to see some of the prospective things that have happened. We still have a really long way to go. So I'm looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say to give us certainly a flavor of the past. And I'm smiling because, Allison, as an archivist, has managed to put together some really interesting pieces of history, and certainly some legendary people are here on our panel today. I want to turn it over in a moment to our moderator, Dr. Tim Redsloff, who teaches history and LGBTQ studies at MSU. He earned his BA from the University of Michigan in 2006 and his PhD in history from Yale. He's currently working on his first book. Congratulations. Metro Gay, about gay and lesbian life and politics in Metro Detroit from 1945 to 85. His writings on Michigan's queer past have appeared in the anthology Creating a Place for Ourselves, the journal GLQ, the collection Making Suburbia, and the pages of Between the Lines, which I know many of us read. I'm looking forward to being an audience member now, and so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Redsloff to do introductions. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Marquita. So my role here is moderator. What I'm going to first do is introduce the panel and then make a few remarks and then kind of turn much of the program over to the panelists. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I just want to share a quote that I stumbled on recently from Tennessee Williams to kind of give us something to have in the back of our minds. I think people who are shocked by the truth are not deserving of the truth. And the truth is something one has to deserve. So in terms of our panelists, I'm so pleased with the 4 individuals who volunteered their time to be with us here tonight. I'm going to go in chronological order of who arrived at Wayne earliest. On the far end is Charles Alexander. Detroit native Charles Alexander is a celebrated area artist who has written the weekly column Parting Glances in Between the Lines for 25 years. Now 82, he began at Wayne as an undergraduate in 1959, wrote for the Daily Collegian, precursor to the South End, and worked his way through college. He finished his bachelor's in 1972 and later returned to pursue his master's. He was employed with the Office of Urban and Regional Studies and with the Graduate Division at Wayne in the mid-1960s. He subsequently worked with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and then with the Detroit Public Schools. Next we have Renee Mccoy. The Reverend Dr. Renee Mccoy began at Wayne State University at age 16 in 1967 and was here during the fervent activism of the late 1960s. As a young lesbian, she snuck into such bars as the Palais and the Barbary Coast before becoming active in the later 1970s with the Metropolitan Community Church of Detroit, which had a special ministry to the gay community. McCoy later went on to found Full Truth Fellowship Church of Christ and was a vital African-American LGBTQ leader in the city and nationally. McCoy wrote her doctoral dissertation on HIV/AIDS among African-American men who have sex with men and earned her PhD in anthropology at Wayne in 2005. She now resides in Seattle, Washington. Lynn Rose. In 1994, Lynn Remsburg, now Lynn Rose, became the university's first paid staff member devoted to programming and counseling for LGBTQ students, along the lines of similar offices at the University of Michigan, MSU, Eastern, Western, and Oakland. The office was phased out after Rose took a new job and after the departure of Wayne President David Adamany. She earned her bachelor's from Eastern Michigan University and her MSW from the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Rose currently has her own private practice in Ann Arbor, specializing in clinical social work. Ashton Niedzwiecki identifies as a pansexual transgender man. While a student at Wayne State University, he came out as trans at age 26 and began pursuing hormone therapy and gender affirmation through the local organization Transcend the Binary. I work in a library, binary. Niedzwiecki soon became a noted student activist and served as president of the GLBTA Student Union, now called Jigsaw. In 2014, he co-founded FTM Detroit, a support group for trans-masculine identified people in the metro area. He earned his BA in psychology from Wayne in 2016 and plans to pursue graduate studies in social work. And I'll note that Kim Ferguson, who was scheduled to take part in the panel, had to cancel. I would like to the thank yous that Dr. Chambly extended, I would like to thank Charles for stepping in at the last minute to join our panel. So our panelists have been asked to speak for 7 minutes each about their experiences as LGBTQ people at Wayne State at their respective times that they were here. We'll follow these opening remarks with some follow-up questions from me, and then open the discussion to the audience for Q&A and sharing of your own experiences on campus over the years. But first, I'd like to set the stage. In January 1946, an anonymous letter accusing Wayne University professor Robert Babcock of being homosexual prompted an investigation by the Detroit police. One witness told the lieutenant in charge of the case, called Babcock a panty waist. Another said he looked like a fairy. In the end, however, the investigator found no solid evidence of homosexual behavior, but recommended that the professor be kept under close surveillance. Despite official hostility toward homosexuals, the Wayne University campus, its name changed to Wayne State University in 1956, served as a vibrant focal point for gay life in the decades following World War II. So for at least half of its existence, it's been a major locus for queer folk in Metro Detroit. Hal Lawson and Jerry Moore met at the Tau Kappa Epsilon fraternity in the early 1950s and became close friends. For a time, they roomed together in an apartment near Wayne, and in 1958, together with fellow alum David Brewer, they formed the Detroit chapter of the Mattachine Society, the first homosexual organization in Michigan. After he was pressed to leave his position at Wayne State University in the late 1950s, Finley Hooper secured a job in the English department faculty here at Wayne, among many closeted professors that enjoyed long careers here. In the 1960s, Pearl Berlin and Ellen Gerber taught in the physical education department at Wayne, the health and physical education. I just looked this up today. So they were discreet about their relationship. They lived in Lafayette Tower and had a circle of lesbian friends. In 1971, they moved to North Carolina, where they were plaintiffs in a lawsuit to legalize same-sex marriage in their state in 2014. Ms. Berlin died in May at the age of 93. The surrounding neighborhood boasted a queer presence as well. The Blue Crest Bar, now circa 1890, was a hopping gay gathering place in the 1950s. Traffic Jam and Snug, opened in 1965, was operated by Ben Edwards and Richard Vinson, a gay couple who resided in Indian Village. And in the late 1960s and early 1970s, what had been largely secretive became unabashedly visible. Following the Stonewall riots, gay liberation took hold at Wayne State as it did on other Michigan campuses. The Wayne State Gay Liberation Front held gay dances and built a gay fruit cart to sell apples as a fundraiser for the first Pride celebration, called Christopher Street Detroit 72. The gay radio program, Gaily Speaking, began broadcasting on WDET in September 1973, providing a community voice over the airwaves that reached gay people throughout Metro Detroit. Participants included several Wayne students, including Don Major, a key yet often forgotten activist of the 1970s. And in 1983, Wayne State trustees hired a gay man named David Adamany as university president. The extent to which Adamany was actually open about his sexuality during his sometimes controversial tenure here is up for debate, but it was an open secret. So it is fitting that we're meeting in the David Adamany Undergraduate Library. Tonight, I hope that to open more secrets and share some history that is too often unknown and unrecognized. So we will start with Charles.
Thank you. I recognized that I was a gay person, fortunately, at Cass Technical High School, where I majored in commercial art. In my senior year, And the wonderful thing about that was there were other students who were gay, and we shared this sense of being a group together, even though we were highly closeted. I believe in the concept of being born again. And this happened to me when I was attending Gilead Baptist Church, which is a Southern Baptist church in the west side of Detroit. It occurred to me while I was there that as a gay person, there was no place for me in that religion. So I left. Otherwise, I would now be in the China Inland Mission or something like that. I met someone, he encouraged me to get some studying done and to attend Wayne University, which I did. And when I was called by Tim to replace the person who could not be on the panel, I kind of wrote all kinds of notes. What shall I say? What shall I talk about? And then it occurred to me, as a writer for Between the Lines, that I must have written something in my 700 columns about Wayne State University. So I Googled it, and this is what came up. In parting glances, note, it's pronounced whom. I was 23 in 1959, the year I enrolled at Wayne University, now Wayne State. It took me 14 years to get my BA in English, with 12 hours toward an MA in teaching community college writing. It took so long because I worked days and attended nights, and I put attended with the parentheses, attended nights. I had my share of incomplete, too many martinis, final exams, but got A's and B's as well. I partied down, lived on campus, and enjoyed lots of extracurricular perks. Now I will give you my second born again item here that just occurs to me. I have now been sober for going on 37 years. That changed so much for me. A best friend cajoled, "Child, you've just got to get that piece of paper." He was right. I got my degree just in time to qualify for a teaching position with benefits, and after 28.5 years with the Detroit Public Schools, believable retirement. When I started Wayne, registration was in the basement of Old Main, a Gothic revival building built as a high school in 1893. Sign-up wasn't computerized. Forms were carbon copied. Closed sections were posted, handwritten on cardboard. A credit hour was $12, with 180 semester credits needed for graduation. You could substitute teach with 90. My first class at Wayne, as a Wayne student, English 101, was held in a Quonset hut behind the present State Hall, a leftover from World War II days when soldiers were medically processed there. The huts have long since vanished. As an English 101 student, I read Huck Finn for the first time. My writing job was theater and dance critic for the Wayne Collegian, now the South End, with free aisle comps. Like most gays and lesbians, I was closeted, except to other gays. Gaydar proved a handy tool, not so much for cruising, but for social and academic leverage. If you vibed a professor as gay, it was certainly to your advantage to drop hairpins. If you made friends with a doctor, and I worked for Harper Hospital as an OR tech when I first got out of high school, that was an ace, actually better still, a queen of clubs up your sleeve, should you carelessly get a bug. I hung out in several on-campus bars, including a popular jock joint, Lou Walker's. Sitting next to an habitué I had been introduced to by a dyke friend, he correctly assumed I was gay. "I feel sorry for you," he said, not unsympathetically. "There's not much in the way of professional or academic career for you guys. Stick to sales." In the course of my studies, I made friends with 8 gay professors, including Finley Hooper and Phil Tracy, who was murdered, and the campus journalist student advisor. 2 profs were married, 1 murdered, and getting to know each, gaily speaking, was a dance undertaken with cautious takes 2 to tango steps. I recall a straight sociology professor discussing sexual deviance, prefacing his objective remarks with, "For those who are unfortunately gay," etc., etc. Proudly, I later received an A+ on my final paper for Sociology of Deviant Behavior. It was titled "The Lesbian Subculture in Detroit," based on some weekly madcap visits to the once notorious Palais Bar. A popular campus spot was Blue Crest, a hangout for suds, sandwiches, seductions, and my sport of the limp wrist shuffleboard. It was located on Ferry Street, aptly named. Weekends, it was miraculously hyped into a gay spot with chatty lines for ID check winding around the corner. It was family owned and once owned by the one of the famous hockey players. There was a tacit understanding, Friday through Sunday are, don't tell the Dean of Admissions, gay nights. No straights, please. What's remarkable is that this symbiotic accommodation happened long before Stonewall riots, 1969. Blue Crest was a great place for coming out by exploring the time-honored Socratic teacher-pupil method, both with and without cap, tassel, or form-fitting Wayne State green and gold gown. P.S. I did it my way, cum laude, and barefoot on the mall. Thank you. And by the way, I had no idea I would be sitting next to Renee at church this past Sunday. So, special pleasure.
We just stuck together.
That's right.
You know, as I sit here and I was listening to Tim and I was listening to Charles, and since Tim invited me to be part of this panel, I've been thinking about what it was like, and I am struck as you were reading your article. I'm struck at how different my experience has been and was. I started in Wayne in 1967. When I was 16, the nuns wanted to get rid of me. So they just pushed me out. But I was 16, and I came from, I was recovering Roman Catholic, but I was steeped into the Roman Catholic school and church. I was very much into the Newman Center when I was here. But the Detroit riot happened in 1967. And I started at Wayne that fall. I was a Monteith student. I don't know, is Monteith still around? No. But I was a Monteith student. And Monteith, I was there because Monteith gave you a large university experience in a small student, small environment. So it was, the revolutionary thing. But I was Wayne State was 3% black at that point. And a large part of that 3% were international students. So it was, African Americans were not invited into Wayne State. You had to be pretty good to get in. And I was really fortunate to get in. But I had no sense of, I knew I was a lesbian, I knew I was different, but it was too much. It was just one more layer of difference that I could not deal with. There was no African American organized gay community. We didn't use the word gay in 1967. If you were what we call gay now, you were considered a freak, which was cool. Got you into parties. But there was something wrong with you. And so when I came to Wayne State, it was a dimension of being wrong that I just didn't want to deal with. I also remember as a student that there was a period of time when Wayne State had cameras in the men's bathrooms, and the big issue was getting the cameras out. You know, there was a big fight and a lawsuit and all of that, but the cameras were there so that they could catch homosexual behavior. And so when I hear about, and I left Wayne State at the end of the school year in 1971 because it was just too much. What was considered the gay liberation, I don't even know the name of that group that was here, but it was not welcoming to African American LGBTQ people. It was not, the community was not, the racism in the gay community was harsh. There were a few bars that we could go to as African Americans, and but if you wanted to go to a bar, you could count on being asked for 3 pieces of identification, pictured identification if you could, and you could count on waiting for your drink, you could count on not being treated well. And so what existed for me as a student at Wayne State was being able to live, being called to live in 3 different worlds. There was the straight African American community that that was just there. Then there was the Wayne State community where you just, if you were black, you just kept your head down and tried to pass the class. And then there was the gay community where if you were black, you knew you weren't welcome. And so we had this sort of underground existence. Wayne State was not welcoming to poor people either. At the time, part of the issue was that Wayne State had what they call an urban mission, but we were surrounded by people. Wayne State was steadily taking people's homes and steadily not doing anything to upgrade the lives of the people who lived in this area. And so my experience as a lesbian at Wayne State was just don't get caught doing anything. And but it was that sense of, that lack of affirmation that gave me the greatest education that I could ever have. I came out of the civil rights movement. And so the riots that happened in 1967 and the ability, what I learned at Wayne State was how to think about the world in a different way. The education I got here was spectacular, stellar. I can't complain about the education. But that education taught me how to see what was going on campus, and it also taught me how to craft a social justice response. It taught me that, you know, social justice was more than just being affirmed and tolerated. It was being celebrated. And there was nothing about who I was as a woman. Now, it wasn't too cool being a woman at Wayne State either, but that's a whole nother panel. But as a woman, as a black person, as a lesbian, it taught me that if you want to be all you can be, you're going to have to jump through some hoops. But in the end, it's that eye on the prize thing. And so I left Wayne State in '71, and because I couldn't deal. I had a girlfriend at that time, and I knew who I was. We were starting to use the word gay. It was not a safe space for me. And so I left and got a job, you know, with the city of Detroit, which is what we do, what I was raised to do, is what black folks do. You work for Bell Telephone, the city of Detroit, and one of the utilities. Bell Telephone, y'all don't know what that is. But that was what you did, and so I left and did what I did. 19 years later, I came back, and but the core, the foundation, I learned right here at Wayne State. I learned about truth. I learned about critical thinking. I learned about process. I learned about kissing ass. I learned about, you know, I learned what the white folks really do. And I realized that I knew more about being white than I did about being black. But that those two bodies of knowledge were powerful. And I went on to do activism and MCC in the church, and we started the National Coalitions for Black Lesbians and Gays, and began to fight the very things that that were going on around us based on sexuality. But and then I came back and got a bachelor's, finished my bachelor's, got a master's, and got a PhD, and taught here for about 13 years. And so it was quite a wonderful experience. But I think that Wayne State kind of made up for it, you know, the progress. But there was a point at which it was very difficult. And I don't think that students should ever have to decide which piece of themselves they will bring to an academic situation. But my experience was having to sort of figure out which piece I was going to let live where. And there are students all over the place that had that same kind of schizophrenic experience here at Wayne State. But I love this place and love the education I got and celebrate it all the time, and really, really, you know, celebrate the change. But it was a reflection of the gay community and the internal, the bigotry that took place in the late 60s and early 70s as well. All right.
Well, I actually had nightmares that I'd have to follow Renee Mccoy. And I did. Hard act to follow, and look at, she just sort of spoke off the cuff. But I've prepared some things to say, because when I was asked to prepare for the panel tonight, and Tim, at the time I talked to him, said 3 to 5 minutes, Now he's extended it, which I'm really glad, because I didn't have any idea how I would condense 4 years of work that are reflected in this binder at Wayne State University in 5 minutes. So I apologize now, I don't even know if I'll make it to 7, but it might be older, it might be longer than that. But I was hired to work in August 1994 to create an office within counseling and placement services that focused on providing therapeutic support, educational outreach and programming, and to work to re-energize a student group on campus that had been struggling over the years. Dr. David Adamati, the fairly openly gay Wayne State president, although I didn't know that at the time, it sort of was this well-kept secret. But he did tell me the story about how when he was interviewing, he told the Board of Regents straight up, he told the Board of Regents that he was gay because they were going to offer him the job, and he told me that he told them that he was gay and that they needed to know that before they hired him. So, you know, I heard that from David's mouth. So he was instrumental in spearheading institutional support for this brand new professional staff position in Mission. One of the first decisions that I had to make was to determine the name of the office, which really consisted of me, myself, and I, and was just within the 4 walls of my own personal office space. That was the office. Following the lead of the University of Michigan Lesbian Gay Programs Office, who added bisexuality to their name the same year that I was hired, I believed that Wayne State needed to be just as inclusive at the time and strongly advocated for Wayne's office to be named Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual Services. Remember, this is 1994, no LGBTQA. So I did strongly advocated for this, and to my surprise, as I recall, it's been a long time, but that naming process was pretty simple and adopted without much difficulty. Nothing else would be that simple. For the next 2 to 3 years, the majority of my work was focused on getting the word out that I was on campus and to encourage LGBT students to seek counseling support, provide coming out support groups, monthly discussion groups, and to work closely with a student group. 60% of my time was devoted to those efforts. In addition to counseling and support groups, 20% of my time was designated for educational programming for students, staff, and faculty. Some of the highlights of that work included National Coming Out Day luncheons, which I was able to do 4 times, taking leadership in planning 3 large conferences for not only campus participants, but also for participants from around Detroit and Michigan, presentations to classes, staff meetings, and at state and national conferences. I was also asked to serve on the Detroit City Council Domestic Partnership Task Force and Strategic Planning Subcommittee, Wayne State's Division of Student Affairs Diversity Training Committee, and appointed to the President's Commission on the Status of Women. And in 1996, I was actually nominated for an Academic Staff Award. I didn't get it, but it was nice to be nominated. This work was in addition to providing counseling and promoting LGBT services and addressing homophobia on campus, in Michigan, and at national conferences. I was featured many times in the South End newspaper, interviewed for WDIV Channel 4, the Detroit Free Press, and Between the Lines newspaper to increase visibility of the services that were available and the work that I was doing. I must add at this time that I didn't recognize how this intense outgoing media coverage would impact my life until one of the Detroit Free Press articles showed a photograph of me, and in bold print underneath, which I happen to have a copy of it, I was young then, I was on the front page of The Way We Live in April of 1995, and it said, Lynn Remsburg, who is a lesbian, is coordinator of lesbian, gay, and bisexual programs at Wayne State University in the Free Press in 1995. I don't think I anticipated that. I mean, that's being outed in a pretty huge way, right? My dad, who was a teacher, a retired teacher in Detroit Public Schools, was horrified, mortified, upset, angry, all of the above, that I was outed in that way and that he was basically outed in that way. And since Remsburg is not a common name, it was very, very public for his wife at the time, his church people. It created quite an uproar in my life, and that's what basically led me to change my name from Remsburg to Rose, partly because of Bette Midler's song, The Rose. Aww. I don't know. But that's why I changed my name in an effort to protect him from further embarrassment. But, you know, unfortunately, we were separated for like 7 years before we were able to work through it. But it was a good thing. The work drastically changed in late 1995 into 1996, and especially in 1997 for both very positive and all reasons, and also to foreshadow the rapidly decreasing institutional support that was ahead. In the mid-1995 through 1998, I was required to become the coordinator of the Minority Resource Services that was part of the counseling office. This required being available to meet with students and publish a minority resource directory twice a year. As you hear this was in addition to my LGBT work, and what I thought was a rather stunning blow. And I had no choice in the matter. I was also awarded the $5,000 President's Affirmative Action Grant that was for a grant that was for proactive educational outreach program to address heterosexism and homophobia on campus. I was able to hire a part-time project coordinator to help organize and manage the paperwork and data involved for the grant. And as a direct result, I designed and presented 25 workshops for classrooms between 1996 and into May 1997. I was also asked to present twice to 250 first-year medical students at the Wayne State School of Medicine. This was a very exciting time. Everything was rapidly growing, yet stressful as my job description changed to providing 70% counseling support to include more general population students and 10% to educational outreach and programming. So I went from 60-20 to 70-10, and the 70% was, I was told in no uncertain terms, that I had to provide more to the general student population. How I was able to manage all the responsibilities was quite a feat now that I look back, but I was younger then, and I was able to do it, but it was, you know, pretty stressful to have this sort of go on. Then things drastically changed, and I really feel that the bottom fell out. As was described in my professional evaluation from May 1997 through April 98, my position description continues to differ from original hire position in 1994. Counseling merged with placement services during this time and moved from the Student Center to the first floor of the Faculty Administration building. There was a huge, quote, reassignment of counseling services to provide a greater focus on the professional direct delivery of group and one-on-one career exploration and development services. This included me. I was to provide now 80% of my time counseling, but more to the general growth concerns of all students, cover the front desk during evening hours, and only 10% of my time was left for educational outreach and programming for LGBT issues, as well as general population issues. It was just sort of mind-boggling how this all sort of spiraled to less and less focus, less and less support for the LGBT services that I was hired to create and to do, and was, I don't mean to brag, but very successful with it. I mean, it was a vibrant program. It was a vibrant service to students. I was recognized, around the state, around national, conferences, representing Wayne State and sort of showing what the institutional support was like. And then it just sort of blew up. In May 1998, I wrote in my performance review, as visibility for the LGB services office increases, requests for consultations, information, classroom presentations, and committee participation do as well. The growth has been positive and negative aspects to consider. In the positive light, it is clear that over 3.5 years of dedicated work has produced exciting and tangible results. In the negative light, I am only one person, and managing all aspects of my expanding professional role and responsibility in a highly effective manner I require myself can be quite challenging. This is even more evident when my professional assignments have shifted and I'm being asked to provide more general counseling due to the reorganization of counseling and career and personal development. It remains to be seen if I will be able to fulfill all these expectations over the next year in a highly effective manner as I have in the past. So that was in May of 1998. Backtrack a little bit, in 1997, David Adamati announced he was leaving Wayne State, and a new president, Irvin Reed, started in November 1997. This was a very significant blow, and I became more and more convinced that the institutional support was changing and not for the better. A job opportunity presented itself to me in February 1998 when the University of Michigan was looking, go blue, sorry, for a clinical social worker with experience working in the University Counseling Center and with expertise with LGBT population. I decided to apply to just see what happens. I remember one of my colleagues here at Wayne State handed me the job description and said, "Lynn, things aren't looking good here. I think you ought to apply." So I sort of took it, and as I recall, I had about 4 days to put a resume together, and I drove out to the University of Michigan to hand it in on the due date. And then I just, decided that I would just try it and see what happened. And to my surprise, really, I was offered the job and then had to do some real soul searching. I decided that I needed to move on to a university with a 28-year history of institutional support of LGBT people and work, a counseling center that wanted my talents and expertise, and, to be honest, with an $11,000 pay raise. I left Wayne State at the end of July 1998, and even though a person was hired to take my place here, by 2000, there was no mention that LGBT services ever existed at Wayne State, and hasn't now for 20 years. It is also unfortunate to note that currently, CAPS has 13 professional staff and only one counselor lists LGBT issues as an area of interest. So that was my experience here, and it's very strange kind of coming back, walking through the student center where the office used to be, and then this library was here before I left, I believe, or I came for another conference or something, but anyway, that was my experience from 1994 to 1998, and I do wish that there was an office, and that it continued.
folks are a lot to follow. So I want to thank Tim. I want to thank Allison for putting this together and for having me. When I came to Wayne State in 2009, I had only been out even as a gay person for a year. I was not very experienced in this community. In my time at Delta College, where I attended before I transferred here, I started a student group called Unison, which was a gay-straight alliance, and it was the first one of its kind at that school. So when I came here, I knew that if I was going to succeed academically, I had to find the student group that was its partner, I guess. I had to find that group and I had to join it, and I had to really immerse myself in the community so that I could feel like myself, and I knew that that was the only way that I would be able to succeed academically. So when I joined, John Corvino was one of the faculty advisors. I've been lucky enough to get to know him over the years. Thank you. So I joined, and within my first year, I had made it onto the e-board. Within the second year, I was vice president, and by my third year, I was president. In my time with that group, I did a lot of work with the Dean of Students office. I did a lot of work with counseling and psychological services. I was the student representative on the Lgbtq Student Services Council. I'm not sure if that still exists. I haven't kept up a whole lot. Do you know, Dr. Chambly?
Not familiar.
Okay. That might have unfortunately fallen apart. Its goal was to work with the Dean of Students office and to bring people from departments across the university to provide even just basic programming for LGBTQ students. There was no, and still is no, real office, so that's the best that we were able to do. So I served as the representative from the student group. There were people from various academic departments, a lot of different departments, and we were able to put together a training that was largely for faculty and staff to help them create classrooms that were more inclusive environments, and to help financial aid and admissions and offices like that be more welcoming places for LGBT students, because that can be a scary experience as an LGBT student, going into those offices and worrying, is this person going to treat me poorly because I'm queer? Is this person not going to understand me? Do they secretly hate me and they just don't feel like they can be open about it? So I really wanted to kind of bring that student life out into the open and make this a really safe, welcoming campus. And thankfully in my time I was, I think, pretty successful at doing that. The university was kind enough to send me out to, we called it Mumble Tech. It's the Midwest Bisexual, Lesbian, Gay, Transgender, and Ally College Conference. It's a mouthful, and that's why we called it Mumble Tech. I was able to go there, I think, 4 times, and once I actually was able to give a presentation about the differences between feminist and transgender theories on gender identity, and explaining there wasn't really as much difference between the two as we might be taught in academic settings. That actually had to get moved into a larger lecture hall because so many people showed up and wanted to hear what I had to say. I felt sorry for them. In my first year at Wayne State, I lived in the all-girls floor in Ghaffari Hall. You can imagine that that was incredibly awkward for me. But I didn't come out for quite a few years after I came to Wayne State as a trans man, and that was where my parents felt comfortable with me staying, so that's where I stayed. In my second year, I moved on to Prentice, and my roommates and I were determined to turn that into the Castro district of Detroit. We got a lot of our queer friends to move onto that street, and every week on Sunday we would shut down the street without the permission of the Detroit police and just have a barbecue on the entire street. It was great. So yeah, I did a lot of work with that, and through my work with the LBTA Student Union, which is now called Jigsaw, I met a lot of other people who identified as trans, and I met a lot of people who identified as trans men, and it made me feel comfortable enough to come out myself. And it was in my last year, or maybe 2 years at Wayne State, that we got together and said, you know, there's not really anything out there for trans men. There's no real space that's just for us. The spaces that are designated for transgender people are dominated by trans women, and they should be. We didn't want to take space away from trans women because they need that space and they need those resources. So we decided to take the space that we already occupied and create a community from that. And we were able to form FTM Detroit, and we did a little bit of work with Wayne State with that. And since then, that has grown quite a bit, and I continue to do my work with that.
So I think I'm going to follow these excellent presentations with just kind of one question before turning it over to the audience. And it has to do with kind of this challenge. You know, as a historian, I'm often, certainly before November 2016, it was much more difficult than it's become, but it was always a challenge to get students to think of history not as a progressive narrative. And certainly some of the accounts here suggest that we haven't always, it doesn't always get better. And so I guess what I'd like folks to reflect on a little bit and share is in what ways do you see it having gotten better, both on campus and off, because there is kind of this intertwining relationship between what happens within the halls of the academy and the real world outside, and in what ways has it not gotten better? And whoever wants to step in first.
Well, as someone who came out basically 50 or more years ago, I've really seen changes. When I came out, the idea that there would ever be a pride parade, that there would ever be a publication, that there would ever be organizations was an impossibility to envision. Back then, you were considered a pervert, a deviant, and I hated the term a fairy, but that's what I believed what I was. So I hid. Yesterday, I was over at the Welcome Center at Wayne State University, and I was looking out the window, and lo and behold, I see two boys. Well, I judge them to be in their 20s, very nice looking. They had on their shorts and so forth, which is always pleasant to see in the summertime. But the interesting thing was, they were holding hands out in public, and I was just startled. When I went to the parade in Ferndale, I actually, when I got there and saw the crowds, I was moved to tears, because to see that and to come from a time when there was nothing, nothing, was a miracle for me. To see the openness and to see families with their children, and I sat in the affirmations entrance and watched the young people come in for the prom. They were happy, they were joyful, they were holding hands, no thought of being pariahs. And that was remarkable. And I was thankful to have lived long enough to witness that experience. And it's due largely to those of us who have been willing to be who we are, and to be proud of who we are, and to be in positions such as teaching, or positions such as physicians or nurses, and to be open to encourage others. What we have to do now, however, is make it clear that the young people, those who are growing up, get politically involved, speak out, and not be ashamed to fight back, because those forces that are operative now can really change things. So that's the task for the university too. So.
I was thinking that, when I came back to finish my undergraduate degree, I went in to declare a major. You know, you had to go and get your form. I don't know how the hell they do it now, but you had to go in and, get your form signed when you get ready to declare your major and stuff. And a woman in the anthropology department said to me, you're not going to make it in this department. And if you know anthropology, there's not a whole lot of black anthropologists. There may, back then, there weren't. What happened at that point is I'm sure that the education that I got, the skills that I got through my education at Wayne State, empowered me to not take that. And I sit here and I remember all of the people in the anthropology department that fought for me and that fought with me. I had some, because I was both out. You never know when you're out and black whether they're responding to your race or your sexuality or both. You just know that is no fun. But the anthropology department, when challenged, it was a good and progressive and I think successful journey to not just take that. But I often wondered how many other black kids came in to declare anthropology as a major and were told, you're not going to make it in this department. Or one other iteration of that. What came from that fight, I was at the health department, so I invited everybody. I refused to be silent. My bosses had been graduates of Wayne State, and some of the other students sort of joined in with me to not take that. And I think that Wayne State has responded to resistance in a very positive way. And from that experience, I certainly, graduated and got my undergraduate degree. When I applied for the master's program, they lost my application, but cashed my check. I had to go to, I did things like Marianne Mahaffey did a letter of recommendation, But you learn to do that, to fight that battle. At the same time, HIV and AIDS was devastating people. AIDS hit in 1981. And we were fortunate enough, anthropology, I'll tell you that the chair of the anthropology department, Dr. Andrea Sankar, fought with me and fought for me, and several of the other anthropology professors there said, well, let's do something different. And we went to them and said, let's have a new model. I was a pastor of Full Truth. I had started Full Truth Fellowship Church, which also had an AIDS organization called Hopes Incorporated. And in spite of the racism, in spite of the homophobia, and in spite of the stigma that came with HIV and AIDS, a bunch of us got together and made HIV and AIDS part of our academic journey. As a result, students in anthropology, Wayne State has a great business and organizational anthropology department. program, as well as a good medical anthropology program. And so they came and they served, they sat with Hopes Incorporated and helped us analyze and evaluate what we were as an organization. Students from Wayne State, from the anthro department, came and volunteered with HIV and AIDS. We got a huge grant to look at the meaning of caregiving for African Americans that just sort of went on, and it's still doing, they're still doing a lot of data collecting and data analysis. So over the changes that I've seen has been this sense of really becoming a university that responds well to its urban mission. My hope is that it will continue in one way or another. I don't see that presence of Wayne. I see Michigan State, I see U of M doing more stuff in urban planning. I mean urban communications and urban involvement. But I know that the anthropology department now has the anthropology of the city. So that's hopeful. But there's certainly much more of a need for Wayne State to connect with the African American LGBTQ community, for one, and to connect with continue to connect with the surrounding African American community as a whole. I always say you can't have a healthy black LGBTQ community unless you first have a healthy black community. And so that is, I always feel when I do these things that I gotta figure out which part of me I'm speaking, and that ain't right. You know, that it don't feel right now, and it has never felt right. So I think that it's up to us as academics, for one, to figure out how we can, if you educate the whole person, how can you affirm and celebrate and include the whole person in all of this? There's still this, which mouth are you speaking out of? And I haven't felt that in a long time. And I realize I haven't felt it in a long time because I haven't come to things like this in a long time, I don't know what the question is, but...
I would just say, I came out in 1977, so that's 41 years. What's my math? Is that right? Oh, Toledo. And I remember, things have significantly changed, because I remember when I first came out and going to bars, because that was the only social place to be. Going to the Underground, anybody know the Underground? 5 West, and we'd go, because that was the only place that you could be with other gay people and lesbian people and socialize and have fun. And but I also remember being in those bars and police, Detroit police coming in and just causing trouble and wanting IDs, wanting liquor licenses, to just really harass. And I remember that happening many times. I also remember, as Dr. McCoy is saying, Mary Ann Mahaffey was running for the Detroit City Council because she was the president and was eventually the president of the City Council. And I remember when she was running, and for that election, she showed up to the Underground bar at 8 Mile and Greenfield to meet us, to ask for our vote. And I remember just like falling out. It was like a person was coming to our community. So now those places are no longer pretty much, but that was the place to go. And I also remember that at that time, for about a few years. I was working as a youth coordinator or a youth director in the United Methodist Church. And I was, so, you know, I was living a double life because the last church that I served, I was in Brighton, Michigan. I had a partner and lived in Detroit. And I also was very active with the Detroit MCC Church. So on Sundays, well, on every day, I remember going down 96. You all know where 12 Oaks Mall is. There's a big water tower there. And to me, that was a line of demarcation. It was like I could be myself, I could be who I was, I could be active in the community, I could socialize, I could live my life as a lesbian. And then when I had to go to work in the church, I would drive down 96, and once I got to that water tower, I was like, oh yeah, now I gotta act straight. How I did that, I don't really know. But a lot of people in the church wanted to set me up with their nephews and sons and whatever, so I guess I did okay because I wore pantyhose and skirts and all that stuff. But, you know, so, and then I would on Sundays, sometimes I would preach, sometimes, you know, I always did the youth group, I had it in the afternoon, because I wanted to be able to leave and have the youth group be done so I could drive from Brighton all the way down to the Central United Methodist Church for the MCC service. And I would meet my partner there, and then it was schizophrenic. I mean, it was really like, what? And then sometimes I was asked to preach at the MCC church, so I would be this person, and then I would preach. I finally had to leave the church because it was just, you know, it was just too much. But what I know now, and I also thought that if they ever found out, because I was working with youth, I would have been fired in 1982. So I went back to school, and, you know, the rest is sort of history. I also just want to mention that now, you know, at that time, I'm not sure when Affirmations was started, but that then became the social center. And I was a youth coordinator there. And worked with the youth, and we had the first prom, I believe in 1990-ish, and that was just, you know, terrific. So,
might I interject?
Yeah.
My column between the lines this week is about affirmations. It's 30 years for them, and when they started, their slogan was, "Gay is good. You are not alone."
yeah,
And
I remember that, yeah.
today, that's obvious.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot has changed, and I was able to be out, you know, here. It was a little weird because I was sort of the lightning rod, and I have to say that there were staff people who were gay, lesbian, who avoided me when I worked here. They didn't want to be seen with me because then they would somehow, I don't know if they'd get cooties or I would somehow out them. But it was a very solitary position here that my closest sort of colleagues and friends were straight people. And even you know, there was a gay faculty staff group, which I guess is probably still running. Those people, you know, that would attend that meeting, like I knew who they were, and then they'd see me on campus and wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't say hello, wouldn't do anything because I somehow would out them. So, blah, blah. I really do, I mean, and you know, we have marriage. I mean, marriage happened, which I never would have thought happened. But yeah, we have to get the young people politically aware because we have got to change what's happening.
We definitely do have to get young people politically aware.
Register to vote and vote to vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a problem that I see a lot in my generation and generations that have come after me is not feeling that you can affect change, so why bother? It kind of breeds apathy. I grew up in a small town in mid-Michigan. It's Pinconning. We have more cheese stores than we do police officers. That's the truth. When I grew up, I had never heard the word transgender. The only reference I had was woman trapped in a man's body on Ricky Lake, that kind of thing. So that was just a freak show on daytime TV, and I didn't think that that was a real thing. So I had no idea that this could even apply to me. And it wasn't even until I graduated high school and had a failed 3-year-long engagement that I was able to admit that I liked women. So I didn't learn the word transgender until I started college. I didn't learn that transgender was a thing that you could realize you were in adulthood until I came to Wayne State and I met my first trans man, who is now a very, very good friend of mine. And I didn't know that transgender was a thing that I could be until my best friend at the time came out as trans. And I was able to watch him transition before my eyes. And seeing his journey and seeing him face the challenges of coming out and dealing with his conservative family and navigating campus life and navigating this and that, it really gave me the courage to eventually come out myself. And he since passed away. He committed suicide. And in my time at Wayne State, I wanted to honor him, so we created the J. Rothko Community Builder Award. We commissioned a panel to review the applications and choose a winner. I was chosen as the first winner of that award, and I was very honored. And that award, I believe, is still being given out, yes, which I think he would love, and he would also hate that we named it after him. But doing things like that and making sure that the community can be as visible as possible, as in your face as possible, as in your face as people are comfortable being, has been the main focus for me in my own personal activism, because you can't build community if people don't feel safe being out. So that's been my biggest struggle and my biggest point of issue, is to just make sure that the community is visible, make sure that I create as many safe spaces as I can, make sure that I take any space that I occupy and make it as safe as possible.
So we'll start with Dr. Corvina, please.
So 2 things. One, Tim, you said something about how progress is not always linear in an upward direction. I think it's also worth pointing out that a large and diverse institution like Wayne State, it's also not consistent across the university. I came here in 1998 to the philosophy department. At the time, in a department of 10 or 11 people, we had 2 other faculty members who were openly gay or lesbian, Bob Yamel, who has since retired, and my late colleague, Barbara Humphreys. I knew people in other departments, in fact, I still know people in other departments, though not as many, who are deeply in the closet, who would do the sort of thing of, hey, John, shh, and then pretend not to know me. So that's something to keep in mind, that a lot depends on where you are, who you know, who your surrounding people are. The other thing I wanted to say real quickly, Dr. McCoy, you mentioned Monteith College, which is no longer in existence, but the current Honors College has absorbed Monteith as part of its history, and the current dean, the current dean of the Honors College is a notorious homosexual. That would be me. And we are very proud to have you as part of the Honors family. So, very, very proud to have you part of that family.
I have a couple of questions for Renee. Where are you from originally, and what do you do in Seattle now?
Oh, I'm originally from here. I'm from Detroit, and I pastor a church in Seattle called Eastgate Congregational UCC. Actually, I co-pastor, and I taught at University of Washington for a bit when I was there, but and did HIV. I mean, most of my professional work, career-wise, has been around HIV and AIDS, prevention, education, and that kind of stuff, and church. But that's what I do in Seattle, and I make pots. I'm a potter, so I make pots, and it's legal to smoke pot there.
We'll go here and then here.
You want me to speak? Oh. I just wanted to say that there's a tremendous difference between
gay life on the campus and the gay life in the immediately surrounding neighborhood. I first came to Wayne as an undergraduate in '69, and this neighborhood was a hotbed of all sorts of radical activity at that time. There was a very strong Black Power movement, there was a feminist movement, there was an anti-war movement, there was a hippie movement, and there was a gay movement. And the Woodward Lounge, which is the oldest continuously operating gay bar in Detroit since '54, was here. The Blue Crest was here. The Club Baths was up Woodward. The Interchange was over by the freeway intersection. I was trying to think of something. I guess those are many of the Brass Rail. Also on Woodward was an African American bar. So
Famous door?
I'm sorry?
Famous door downtown?
Yes, but I'm talking about this immediate neighborhood, within walking distance of the campus. There was a brass rail at Woodward and the Boulevard. There were two brass rails, one on Grand Circus Park and one at
Oh, I didn't know
Boulevard.
about that.
So you had a very different persona because it is an urban university, like other urban universities. You didn't look to student organizations and on-campus contacts for the expression of your gay identity, because there was so much around and in the broader neighborhood, Palmer Park and so forth and so on, that there was that sort of dichotomy. I was Finley Hooper's student as an undergraduate, and we were out to each other, and when I told him that as a graduate I might like to research same-sex relations in 18th and 19th century Detroit as preparatory to the movement that was happening here, he looked at me and said, "You'll never work." And that was the last time that was ever brought up. When I came back as a graduate and studied archives, again, like you, I was very grateful to the quality of the education and training that I got here, and I used that education and training in other parts of the country. Was one of the founders of the Lesbian and Gay Archives Roundtable of the Society of American Archivists and the founding archivist of the Philadelphia Gay Archives. So, there's always been that dichotomy. And in terms of the neighborhood, the surrounding neighborhood, you mentioned about hostility to the poor. Conversely, Preservation Wayne, which was founded by gay students to prevent Wayne from, shall we say, piecemeal destroying the neighborhood, or at least preserving the better buildings. And William Colburn here can speak to that better than I can, but Alan Wallace and others who founded Preservation Wayne. When I went to the University of Michigan in 1973 to begin graduate work, the University of Michigan was much more homophobic and hostile to a long-haired protege of Finley Hooper, assumed to be coming from working-class Wayne State University, that they considered to be unworthy. So, these things, again, are, as was alluded here, depending on where you are and what you're doing in such a large institution, you can have very different experience.
See, I think that, I agree with you, and I think that the challenge before us is to hold the university accountable for not allowing those dichotomies to exist. And in a perfect world, for me, I always wanted to see, I loved it when we were able to do stuff in partnership with the anthropology department. I mean, that was fabulous. And they did I'm clearly biased about anthropology, but it would be great to see more involvement with the gay community in more partnerships with the gay community that exists in Detroit. Now, the problem is that folks will say, we don't have a gay community in Detroit. Everything is but there's LGBTQ, is there Q on there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to be right. I'm trying to keep up. But there's LGBT Detroit. Where is the partnership with LGBT Detroit? I have Full Truth is right there in the middle, and I always do my little commercial. We're in the process of beginning an African American community center, a cultural center that looks at African American LGBTQ community center. I would love to partner with Wayne State and do that. There's very little HIV and AIDS stuff going on. It's not over yet, So how do we partner with the university to do that? How do we partner with the university to do stuff like this in the African American community? Can we do this kind of stuff at a church? What is the history? How do we do this? How do we use academics? I love practice theory. So let's really look at what practice theory is about. And I think that you got to know that there's maybe 1 or 2 black gay bars left. I don't know, the Woodward is sort of it. There may be innuendos, but there's nothing. There's very little in the city of Detroit for black gays of LGBTQ people. And the university can make that better. So I think that the challenge is, if the university is really serious about change and growing a healthy community, how do we make that better? There's Ruth Ellis Center, how do we get this into the university? How do we, and keep them in the university? One of my biggest dreams, and this is my last thing, my greatest dream, probably all my life, has been, how do we teach black people to read? Literacy, I would love to see at our church here in Detroit a literacy program when 40+% of African Americans are functionally illiterate, and Wayne State is right up the road. Something needs to change. Think about being black and LGBTQ and the chances that you are functionally illiterate because of the pressure of being in a school that didn't support you grows even more. So, Wayne State, help me teach my people how to read, so they can read the Bible, that they believe that, if you can't read, you're depending on somebody else to tell you what's in the Bible. The Bible don't say all that shit. Teach people to read. Teach black LGBT people to read. I mean, it's just that simple. It's simple stuff. So.
And cursive writing.
So we started 5 minutes past, so I'm going to extend this to 5 minutes after the half
Can I
past.
just
We had.
offer 2 choice bits of gossip relative to some things that were said?
Well, I was going to have 2 more questions. We did have 1 more person with a hand up. So, Douglas, go ahead, and then we'll go with you here, and then we'll come over to Patrice.
Okay, I have it from a history professor that Adamani wanted to be more out as president, and Romney on the board. He was about to be interviewed by, I think it was the Detroit News or Free Press, for a major article on gays in Detroit. And he announced his intention to the board to come out officially. And Romney told him if he came out, he would be fired. So that ended that official persona. And it wasn't until he got to Temple that he was able to be out. And the second thing is something that you passed on to me, and that is that he was not the first gay president of Wayne State, at least on the evidence that you found, if it's correct, that Clarence Hilberry died in a gay bathhouse in New York City.
That was supposedly the Everhard bathhouse.
Yeah.
But you can't give any validity to that kind of thing.
Well, I believe you did research that.
It was,
Yes,
it was published
yeah.
in the front page of one of these front papers.
Wasn't Alan Gilmore president too?
He would not
Yes.
be the first, he would be the
Third.
maybe, or fourth, or fifth, we don't know.
I think there's a certain melody in the fact that the Ferry Mall was changed to the Gilmore Mall.
You had a question there, please.
I just wanted to make a comment about, and in response to you saying that you need a healthy Black community. And I think the problem is much deeper than that. We need to have a healthy human community. And it saddens me to hear what someone who is outside of the so-called acceptable normal is. It's the dark side of humanity. And I don't know how they pick people. But I know I'm an immigrant from former Yugoslavia. And when we came here and settled in Cleveland, and I walked with my girlfriend who was also Slovenian, but we wanted to talk English to learn. And they didn't, I'm white, right? I'm not Black. I'm not Chinese and all this. And we'd walk by and you would hear someone say, oh, there go the damn DPs, because they heard the accent. So I'm saying that there's a dark side to human nature that if they're not confident in themselves, and it's not an excuse, they will pick on a group they find as vulnerable. And it saddens me that you have to go through all of this, but it also bothers me that we have Afro-American studies, we have Latino studies, now we have, because those groups isolate themselves to some extent. I mean, I'm straight, I'm sorry. You know, shouldn't we say, and you shouldn't be have to say, oh, I'm sorry, or worry about whether they will accept. So, and I think that acceptance comes when people go inside themselves and say we're all human. There's only one race. And we put other human beings at suffering and feeling that you don't belong. Not in this community. But the more isolated you become, you know, you should be able to go to a bar, any bar. But because of this, you know, we should teach people how to be human. And just because they have degrees, you know, we expect the university is running like a business. And money is everything. So you're not going to find a moral thread there or an ethical thread. You know, and I know I belong to the academia, and we have some gay or lesbian. Oh, did you know he was gay and all this? And I look at them and I said, so why? Why do you say that? You know, it's a piece of gossip.
What's radically changing the gay scene is this. Communication now is this. Meeting other gays is this. It's impersonal, and it's also something that's very easily tracked by anyone who wants to track it for whatever reason. But this is radically changing things, and we need to be aware of that.
Patrice was the last hand, I'm sorry, so.
I moved back to Detroit around the same time that Renee Mccoy moved back to Detroit, and I just want to say thank you, Renee. It was a really difficult time, I think, the late 80s, and Full Truth Church was definitely a sacred space, a safe space, and you provided such insight that was so needed for those of us who attended the church, and the work that you did really not only healing the community, but offering a place where you were affirmed and you were encouraged to become involved in activism.
Oh, no, don't do that, don't do that.
We couldn't hear what you said. Can you repeat something?
So I would like to thank the panel, Charles Alexander, Renee McCoy, Lynn Rose, and Ashton Nitwicki.
Yes.
Okay. For really kind of bringing some important testimony about kind of the unique place that Wayne has been. It's certainly a rich and complicated history that it is really vital for us to know. And hopefully the next 150 years here, if there is another 150 years, will, that narrative arc of whether it's progressive or not, or repressive, will be in the progressive direction. So thank you all for coming.